Well, hey, everybody, it's Tuesday. It is time for Keep Your Finger in the Text live report. Here's what's going on. Keith Putzel from Keep Your Finger in the Text. Let's take a look at what's going on at Keep Your Finger in the Text. Monday nights, we have Taking Reps. It is 7 p.m. Central Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. This is a time set aside for new and or experienced preachers, those that are just getting their feet wet, as well as those who are experienced and looking to commit or recommit to expository preaching in the open air. Yes, it is possible to preach expository sermons in the open air. One of the things that we happen to get involved in is, number one, how do we go about truly preparing sermons and working through them? We may have been through a workshop, we may have been through some other training, we may have had some higher education in sermon preparation, but if we are not engaged in continually looking and being good observers at text, oftentimes we can lax in some of those fundamentals and those principles. So Taking Reps is an opportunity for us to really dive in and hone in our skills on biblical texts. Right now, we are in Romans 4, and we are kind of at a turning point that we have been talking about a lot of different things. Last night, we were talking about applications and illustrations that were coming from the text. How can we apply this to believers, unbelievers, universal applications that apply to both believers and unbelievers, as well as illustrations? How can we look to communicate our text in a way that is clear, simple, and brief, but straight to the point as we are preaching in the open air? Our team has about 8 to 10 guys on it. And again, it is for new and or experienced preachers. We are going to be a couple weeks removed from our next study session. So if you'd like to join in on the next study session, look out on sfoi.org/keep your finger in the text taking reps, or go on out to evangelist info and click on keep your finger in the text taking reps. It does take us about 6 to 8 weeks per se to work through a sermon. And our goal is to have 6 or 8 sermons that are prepared throughout the year. And really, that's the goal, that we would put the tools, principles, and strategies into practice. There's not a whole lot of instruction. Oftentimes, there's a quick review on what we're looking at, but we really dive in and we really hone in on being observers, challenging each other, bringing forth applications, challenging each other back to the text, all of the principles that we work at in the workshop itself. So if you'd like to see the tools, principles, and strategies in use, with the goal to come out with a preaching outline like we're doing with Romans 4, that you can take this preaching outline, add some of your own personality to it, and be able to preach this outline, but knowing that it's not someone else's outline. You've worked on this, you've seen this, you've marinated in the text, and it's become part of you. So you'll be able to preach the tone of the text. You'll be able to preach the thrust of the text, having been working with guys who have been there to encourage your progress as well. So come on and take a look at the tools, principles, and strategies in use. Keep your finger in the text, Taking Reps, Monday nights, 7 p.m. Central Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. We meet for about an hour a week. If you do happen to miss a week, we do record all of our sessions, so you can go back and review what we've covered. You can take a look at the working document as well, and you do end up with a preaching outline at the end of that study session as well. So it's a great time for us to continually make progress in our work and working through the roadmap to rhetoric as we work on biblical texts. Well, tonight we are in the midst of our Isaiah workshop, and we have been spending a lot of time on understanding what it means to get the text right, as well as now taking a look at transitioning to how do we communicate it. If you are new at open air preaching, if you are experienced at open air preaching, and again, you want to get started or you want to recommit in expositional preaching in the open air. What I mean by that is expositional preaching is when you study a text, the main point of the text becomes the main point of your sermon. So you are really driving home that main point and how it applies to our audience today, as it did to the original audience, but in light of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So if you would like to get started or recommit and refresh on tools, principles, and strategies of what we call the roadmap to rhetoric, that is taking into account things like the different levels of context, the author's organization, honing in on an argument, finding organic connections or legitimate connections coming out of our text, talking about how do we preach the text? How do we avoid any frameworks that are going on or presuppositions that we bring to the text? And finally, how do we organize all of this to be able to communicate it? That's really what we work through in the workshop. We have 18 guys right now that have been registered and committed into the workshop itself. Tonight, we're going to be talking about preparing to preach part 1, the steps that it takes to really work through and think through how do we communicate our text, including formulating an argument. Once we know the author's main point, how do we look to communicate that to our audience as we preach and teach in our ministry context? So we're on our final leg of the roadmap to rhetoric. We're on our third stop before bringing our sermon home. We've had a great time. Last week, we were in a small group presentation, getting the opportunity to challenge each other and encourage each other as we work on our biblical texts that are grounded in Isaiah. There's been a lot of good interaction, a lot of questions, and I know sometimes people have this look inside the workshop that it becomes overwhelming because there's a lot of information coming at you, and it does involve a tremendous amount of work to be able to preach faithfully an expositional sermon in the open air. But it is worth it to do so because you are focusing in on the text and you're not preaching the culture. You're not preaching, as we've heard, stop sinning, or we're not preaching from parts of the Bible. We are preaching the Bible. And there is a way that you can preach a sermon, although not as exhaustive sometimes as you would in the pulpit or in a Sunday school. But there is a way that you can preach faithfully and preach the full thrust of that text of what God not only intended to write, but also the intention behind that. So it is Tuesday nights, 7 p.m. Central Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. I will let you know ahead of time that I'm working out the logistics for the summer session, but we are going to focus in on Exodus. We are going to focus in on the book of Exodus. So if you want to learn how to preach through the book of Exodus, especially in the open air, and what can we glean from the book of Exodus, reach out to me at either heathputzel@gmail.com or go on out to SFOI. You'll see the link there, sfoi.org/keep your finger in the text, or click on evangelist info and click on keep your finger in the text. Fill out the contact form. Love to be able to talk to you about engaging in the workshop itself. Well, those are two things that go on regularly on Monday nights and Tuesday nights. We also have the opportunity that if you would like to bring a local workshop to your area. What do I mean by a local workshop? I have the opportunity to bring a local workshop, whether it is virtually or physically on location. Maybe it's an extended weekend, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or Thursday, Friday, Saturday after the Lord's Day Sunday, or maybe it's a summer retreat, or you have a specific Saturday that you'd like to work through, or a weekend, or Friday night, Saturday during the day, whatever the case it is. As far as logistics, we can tailor what you're looking for as far as the workshop itself. I know we do a 5-hour session on Thursday nights before the Super Bowl outreach kicks off. During the day, we spend some time in some of the major pieces for open air preachers, but we've also taught pastors and teachers in Colombia. We've also worked with small groups over an extended period of time, whether it's physically or virtually. And also one of the biggest opportunities that's coming up is coming up here June 19th through the 23rd. So June 19th through the 23rd is the George Whitfield Program Annual Summer Fellowship Conference. There are 2 tracks during that week, and the first track is going vocational in your preaching. So vocational preaching, how do you transition from a life of maybe secular work into the life of ministry and all that entails with all of the logistics that go on. And if you're looking to improve your preaching, not necessarily looking to go vocational, but looking to improve your preaching as well, come join us for track 2. We're going to be taking a look at biblical theology, the grand narrative from Genesis to Revelation, and how God has been progressing his plan to implement his plan that designed from the beginning. And how does it impact our preaching as we take a look at the biblical text, and how does it find its ultimate culmination in Jesus Christ? So we're going to be spending 4 full days. And those that are involved in track 2 will have an opportunity to engage in a small group text, as well as engage in a text that they will preach out a 15 to 20-minute sermon and gain feedback and questions regarding progress in their text. So this is just some of the opportunities for a workshop. If Monday nights or Tuesday nights don't work out for you, reach out to me, heathputzel@gmail.com, heathputzel@gmail.com. I'd love to be able to talk to you about bringing a workshop to your area. Also, we have going on at SFOI as a whole, we have the Born Again book teaching. And this is a book that is written by Dr. McKeever. It was his doctoral dissertation on the evangelical theology of conversion in John Wesley and George Whitefield. And Dr. McKeever on Thursdays from 3 p.m. Central Time, 4 p.m. Eastern Time, he's about halfway through working with some of the guys who were interested in this. You can find out more information. It started on April 13th, but all of the sessions have been recorded. Go out to sfoi or info@sfoi.org or the bit.ly link that's in the scroll there and find out more information about this book. It's a great opportunity to talk about two of the greats that have been in the field of, I guess you could say, of open air preaching and their thoughts behind conversion. And that helps bring some light to us as open air preachers, thinking about who we encounter and where they might be, whether it's a spontaneous conversion or whether their heart has been enlightened and yet the Spirit has not yet converted them. So great opportunity to engage in that. It's a great time with Dr. McKeever, time for questions and really engaging in this thought process of the theology of conversion of two of the greats in open air preaching or preaching in the marketplace, John Wesley and more specifically, George Whitefield. Well, as you know, at Keep Your Finger in the Text, we're all about providing a path to practical, persuasive, powerful preaching. And what that means is through the workshops, through Keep Your Finger in the Text, taking reps, also the live updates, helping you make progress in your preaching. And some of the times I will bring on pastors or evangelists who are passionate about preaching, passionate about talking about all things preaching, talking about books that I'm reading and sharing insights from the books, podcast, blog post, all things preaching, so that we can help make progress in our preaching. Well, today, the encouragement goes back to preaching points. So today's exhortation and encouragement for you is going back to preaching points. This is a collection of 55 tips of improving your pulpit ministry. Now, I know you're thinking to yourself, well, I'm an open air preacher, but you may have the opportunity to fill the pulpit, but also our pulpit per se is the area that we minister in, whether it's a college campus, whether it is a farmer's market, sporting events, or sometimes if we are filling a pulpit inside a church. But it's 55 tips for improving your pulpit ministry. And these are really birthed out of the podcast from Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, those professors who have been focusing in on preaching. This is a collection of their micro podcast. And I would encourage you to head on out and maybe use this podcast as an opportunity as one of your regular podcasts. These are micro podcasts. They're only about 7 to 10 minutes long, but they're really focusing in on these areas of preaching and helping you improve on your preaching by thinking about these things. Well, the author of the book itself, Scott Gibson, has this section entitled Study Your Listeners. And this really resonated with me, especially coming back from the NFL draft in Kansas City, as we had our fellow evangelists preaching and observing people and studying people's not only reaction, but where they're coming from, what their thoughts are as we are working through the preaching. And it was a great study in human behavior, I guess you could say. And of course, as preachers, we understand that bringing the gospel into the open air brings a certain sense of reaction, but still study your listeners. And what he talks about is studying your listeners as you preach. You don't want to just get up to preach and just preach a blanket statement. What you want to do is you want to help inside your preparation and inside your preaching, understand the audience that you are working with, understand who your listeners are. Now, I know in the open air setting, preaching on a bar scene or preaching at a farmer's market, a college campus, sporting events, you get some sense of what's going on, but you also understand that there are a lot of other different nuances that we're not really involved in. But you want to get a sense to who the people are that's in front of you. And a lot of times that can come from the one-on-one conversations that turn out as a result of the preaching, to also just thinking about where you're at geographically, thinking about what's going on in the world, some of their concerns, some of their situations that are going on in the different areas of the country. And you might be preaching and completely pass by your listeners if you're not aware of what you're saying and how it doesn't necessarily connect with who they are or where they're at. Now, again, I understand we are preaching in the open air. We are looking to preach the word, but as you preach the word, you also want to have your applications and your illustrations grounded in what they may be thinking or what questions they might have asked about the text, anticipating some of the objections as well. And during this short little podcast, that's what he's talking about. Scott Gibson's talking about understanding and being aware of where people may be in their spiritual lives and where they are in their lives in general. Now, oftentimes as open air preachers, we focus in on the unbeliever. We want them to believe in Christ and see their lives renewed and changed, but also to consider the believer. And what do you have for them as you're preaching? How do you encourage them and spur them on to love and good deeds and to walk more in holiness or in progressive sanctification while they are walking their walk? You want to have something to say to both of your audiences. And this is one of the biggest challenges, is to be aware of who we are speaking to. And we want to consider how what we are speaking to them about will really intersect or cross their mind or their thought or their actions or their behavior, and really give them maybe questions that you may have already anticipated questions they might ask, and be able to see how the text itself addresses that. You want to help them understand. And that's one of the biggest things I think we're focusing in on, even in some of our applications and our illustrations last night and taking reps, is think of questions your hearers might ask. What will they ask about the text? What might they not understand about the text? What objections, both believers and unbelievers, would they have about what you're preaching or about God himself? And how does it find its fulfillment in our text? And this will help us understand how we communicate what we have to say. Thinking about all of these aspects of what kind of environment are you in, what kind of maybe whether it's economically or geographically or the area itself or the issues that people are facing, and be able to tie that in with illustrations and applications. And we need to take all of this into consideration when we preach, because we're not just preaching a message. And I know there are some people say, we're just preaching to God alone, which is true. But as we're preaching to people, we're preaching to real people with real issues, real concerns, real crossroads in their spiritual lives as well. And we want to be able to communicate effectively with clarity, simplicity, brevity, order as we are preaching and teaching God's word. And this really resonated this weekend as we were observing. I know one of the other evangelists, Brian Conwell, we were talking about this aspect of studying people and watching people's reactions and how they react and interacting with what's going on. And this also really came evident that we had Pastor Jeff Parks from Cornerstone Baptist Church come to us on Friday, and he delivered a devotional to us, and he spent the whole day with us, preaching and interacting and ministering out in the open air. He was saddened that logistically he wasn't able to be with us the whole weekend, but he did take the Friday and spend the time with us. And I will tell you, we talked a lot on the way down to our ministry spot about preaching. And this is the first time he's had the opportunity to preach in the open air. So how do we go about that? And do we really preach sermons? And I shared with him what Keep Your Finger in the Text is all about. and how do we preach sermons and how do we engage the audience and all of these facets that are there. And he drew some great insights. And the couple of times that he preached as he continued throughout the day, you could see the comfortability of interacting with the crowd and really focusing in and honing in on the message of what you are looking to communicate. And some great observations from him as well, as a pastor, to be able to understand the world of uh, Kansas City, as well as he's just not far from Kansas City in Kearney. But what are people thinking? How are people reacting and responding to the message in the open air? And these were some great insights for him. I will share with you one of the insights that he really, really, I guess, was burdened with, and a takeaway is that the churches in the area and pastors need to gather together to really impact Kansas City. So some opportunities there to really engage in Kansas City. So, grateful for us from around the country to come in, but to be able to help support some ongoing work that's going on in Kansas City. So that was some great insight as well. I will share with you a testimony as part of being able to preach sermons in the open air. We were preaching, and the conviction is that we will preach a message and continue to repeat certain points in that message, but the conviction is that the Holy Spirit will bring who he brings. And I think I was the one that was preaching, but either way, preaching, and all of a sudden, two believers, all of a sudden were walking past, and they stopped, dead in their tracks, and they listened in for about 5 minutes, and then came over to talk to us, and it had been a burden on their hearts that this is something that needs to happen. So we got a chance to talk to them and minister to them, and spend some time really working on discipleship opportunities and connecting them with some of the other churches that are local in the area, or even trying to connect them with Pastor Parks to be able to really mobilize what they felt the burden to do, which is to get out and proclaim the word in Kansas City. And, throughout the weekend, we did have a couple of other churches that were present there that we interacted with. But you can see that the word preached in the open air and the word preached that is faithful will apprehend hearers, or will apprehend even believers to stop and listen in to what's being said and to consider what's being said. So as some encouragement, as well as an exhortation from preaching points, study your audience, understand who we're communicating with, and to be able to communicate in a way that a clear message goes out from God as the way it intended to impact the hearers, so that, number one, if they're unbelievers, that they may be challenged to hear, believe, and they might be saved, or also if they are believers, that they may be strengthened, they may be encouraged, they may be rebuked, they may be exhorted, again, with all patience and instruction, but with a firm, loving care and concern for those who are interacting with the word itself. This is what Keep Your Finger in the Text is all about. Getting better at our craft of preaching and teaching God's word and ministering to the people that we encounter, whether they are believers or unbelievers, and ultimately pointing them to Jesus Christ and his finished work. So if I can be of help to you, I know sometimes Monday nights, Tuesday nights may not work out for you logistically. Possibly a local workshop might not work out for you, or even the format, because it is pretty intense. It is pretty straightforward, and sometimes the learning environment is not necessarily conducive, but you do want to learn how to get better at preaching. Reach out to me. I am available for one-on-one coaching to be able to work through the tools, principles, and strategies, and to kind of customize a more tailored progression, I guess you could say, of what you're looking for, as well as sermon observation. This was an avenue at the Super Bowl outreach that we launched for those that are in Keep Your Finger in the Text, whether it is taking reps or a workshop, an opportunity to observe and see how you are applying the tools, principles, and strategies in, I guess you could say, real life as you are preaching, and gaining some valuable feedback in the organization of your overall preaching and some legitimate gospel connections and being clear about our message so that hearers can understand it. Also, there's lots of software out there, lots of tools to be able to help you out, whether physical or electronic. So if you'd like to know how to integrate those or what resources might be best for certain aspects, reach out to me, heathputzel@gmail.com, heathputzel@gmail.com. Love to be able to talk to you about it. Love to be able to spur you on as you look to make progress in your preaching. Well, we will be back next Tuesday. In light of what's coming up this weekend, I will be participating in the Kentucky Derby outreach, so I will not be available on Thursday for our Keep Your Finger in the Text live update, but you will see some updates as well from SFOI and the team that is at the Kentucky Derby. But whatever you're doing, keep your finger in the text, whether I see you on Taking Reps, whether I see you in a workshop, sometimes on the live updates, whether you're at an SFOI event or even a local event here in Wisconsin. Love to be able to reach out and fellowship with you and continue on our discussion and talking about all things preaching. But whatever you're doing, keep your finger in the text and let's keep preaching for the glory of Christ.